podcast seeking to engage, educate and entertain to connect Amnesty activists across the country. I'm Isabella.
And I'm Tiana. And I would like to begin by acknowledging the Yagara and Turrbal people as the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting in Brisbane. And I would like to extend my respects to elders past, present and emerging from wherever you are listening from, and acknowledge that this land always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Decisions that are our right, like whether or when to have children, have become a matter for governments to control. Some governments also allow other people in our lives to make choices for us, like doctors, faith leaders, or even our parents. And some fail to meet their obligations to provide the information and services that people have a right to.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about bodily autonomy being a human right, particularly in regards to sexual and reproductive rights.
And I want to point out that bodily autonomy certainly isn't only an issue for women, but speaking as a woman, it's fair to say that our rights to express our sexuality and make decisions over our bodies are constantly being challenged.
I'm a 22-year-old woman, and from my own experience, particularly as an adult entertainer, I think that the policing of female sexuality and our bodies is something that I've become increasingly aware of over the years. And because I study sociology and philosophy at university, I have a huge interest in how expressing our sexuality and making decisions about our bodies is policed and how this is maintained through ideologies and social norms. As women, when we challenge those norms, we're kind of made to feel guilty or embarrassed. In some parts of the world, women are stigmatised for challenging these norms, and in some parts of the world, women are even jailed. It's because of this that we keep silent.
In 2014, Amnesty International launched the My Body, My Rights campaign, which was successful in raising awareness about the universal silencing of women. When we don't talk about these issues, we don't fully understand our rights, which means we cannot claim them.
And we will talk a little bit more about Amnesty's My Body, My Rights campaign later on, because it relates to what we're going to be talking about in this episode, and that is abortion rights here in Australia.
It's hard to believe, but a staggering 40% of women of childbearing age live in countries where abortion is banned, restricted, or not accessible, and we are included in this statistic.
Here in Australia, abortion laws are made by state and territory governments, not the federal government. So whether or not abortion is legal depends on where you live, as does the cost and the availability of the procedure.
In Queensland, where we are recording this podcast right now, abortion remains a crime under the Criminal Code Act of 1899, when the state's laws referring to abortion were written.
A woman who unlawfully has an abortion in Queensland can be sent to prison for up to 7 years, and anyone who unlawfully performs an abortion can be jailed for up to 14 years. So to put into perspective just how ridiculous this is, in 2016, a 12-year-old girl had to go and get permission from the Queensland Supreme Court so that she could have an abortion.
Abortion has also been a criminal offence in New South Wales since 1900 and remains in the New South Wales Criminal Code today. Unlawfully procuring an abortion is punishable by up to 10 years imprisonment.
However, like in Queensland, doctors in New South Wales can administer abortions legally if they believe that continuing a pregnancy is going to be a risk to a woman's physical or mental health. A legal precedent was set in 1971, which means that social and economic factors may also be taken into consideration. But as for the rest of Australia, abortion is legal in Victoria in the first 24 weeks of pregnancy, up to 16 weeks in Tasmania, 28 weeks in South Australia, up to 20 weeks in Western Australia, up to 23 weeks in Northern Territory, and in the ACT it is legal but must be provided by a medical doctor in only approved medical facilities. Not too long ago, I spoke to Ellie from the Women's Abortion Rights campaign here in Brisbane about abortion rights in Queensland, and I'd like to share a little bit of that interview with you guys because I think Ellie does a far better job at explaining the issue and how it impacts women in Australia.
WARC, as we commonly call ourselves, is a group of passionate people that have come together to try to decriminalise abortion in Queensland. Reproductive rights is a woman's right, and women's rights are human rights. If every person in the world, if every couple used contraception perfectly every time, there would still be 6 million unplanned pregnancies every year. It is a woman's right to be able to make a decision of her own body and whether she believes she's is wanting to continue with that pregnancy. So abortion is in the criminal code in sections 224, 225 and 226. This means that it is illegal for a woman to have an abortion, take medication for an abortion, use an instrument for an abortion, and it is also illegal for doctors to perform an abortion. In Queensland, the two major issues is stigma and accessibility. So stigma, as long as abortion is in the criminal code, it legitimises anti-abortion stigma. It means it's difficult for women to be able to talk to their family and friends about an abortion, and it's also difficult for them to contact their GP and discuss abortion. Abortion and the procedure to have an abortion is closely linked with miscarriage as well, and as long as there's stigma and it remaining in the criminal code, it is quite difficult for women to access these services. So if the state government wanted to, they could already take abortion out of the criminal code. They just haven't yet. The Australian government can help women by providing more services and funding for access of reproductive health care. So more access in regional areas, more access in rural areas. There's next to no access in rural areas. And the Australian government can provide education to healthcare workers so they know how to refer women to reproductive services. And they should be making abortion freely and safely accessible in every public health hospital. As soon as women have autonomy over their own body, they will have equality.
One point that Ellie made that I think is really important to note is that even when you may be able to access abortions, when there's legislation against it, it kind of legitimizes the negative stigma that does exist around abortion.
Thankfully, there's been a lot of discussion lately about decriminalising abortion in Queensland, as the Queensland Law Reform Commission recently proposed legislation to decriminalise abortion in Queensland. But Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk announced that whilst the government was considering this legislation, they would allow MPs to have a conscious vote against the proposed legislation, which will be debated in Parliament this month.
After the proposed legislation was announced, activism efforts really ramped up amongst all of the groups across Queensland who have been campaigning for women's abortion rights. And I've attended several protests, rallies and pickets to decriminalise abortion, as it's something that I care really deeply about. And at a recent picket organised by the Women's Abortion Rights Campaign in Brisbane, I had an interview with Hope, who discussed with us the need for abortions to be free, safe and on demand. And once again, I want to share a little bit of this interview with you guys because I think it's really important that you hear these things from people who have really been at the forefront of the abortion rights movement. And as passionate as I am about the decriminalisation of abortion across Queensland, I certainly haven't been as heavily involved in the campaign as a lot of other women have. And I do apologise for the quality of the audio because this interview was literally conducted on the streets of Brisbane during a peak hour picket with the Women's Abortion Rights Campaign.
My name is Hope Foley. I am a member of the Women's Abortion Rights Campaign Committee, so I assist with organising and running events like this, such as our pickets and rallies.
So the Queensland Government has recently announced proposed legislation to legalise abortion. What exactly does this mean in terms of abortion decriminalisation across Queensland?
Well, first of all, it brings us into line with most of the other states in this country in terms of recognising that abortion is it's a health issue. So by taking it out of the criminal code, it will then be covered by legislation relating to healthcare.
If the bill is passed, how can the Queensland Government ensure that everyone across Queensland can access abortions?
So decriminalising abortion doesn't really guarantee access for all women. It still leaves vulnerable women from lower socioeconomic backgrounds in a position where they may or may not be able to access that care. So really what we need in future is for abortion to be covered by public health, for it to become part of our public health system so that women of all backgrounds have access to that right.
So, with no guarantee that legislation will change, how can we go about persuading all Queensland MPs to get on board with the initiative?
What it really comes down to is members of the public putting pressure on their local MPs, letting them know that this is what they want, that they believe that women should have access to the full scope of their human rights, and that includes healthcare, and that abortion is part of that. So if people can contact their local MPs and encourage them to vote in favour of women's human rights.
I think that what Hope said about the need for members of the public to speak out and put pressure on their MPs to recognise abortion as a women's rights issue and as a healthcare issue is really reflective of what Amnesty's My Body, My Rights campaign was all about. If we break the silence, then governments will have to step up and start protecting people's right to make decisions about their bodies and their lives.
We all have sexual and reproductive rights, and in order to make our own decisions about our bodies, we also have a right to get accurate information about these issues, access sexual and reproductive health services, including contraception, choose if, when, and who to marry, decide if you want to have children and how many. This also means that our lives should be free from all forms of sexual violence, including rape, female genital mutilation, forced pregnancy, forced abortion, and forced sterilisation.
So, going back to what Hope pointed out, I think a lot of discourse about abortion rights, it's often overlooked as a healthcare issue. And healthcare is also a human right, which means that hospitals, clinics, medicines, and doctors' abortion services must be accessible, available, and acceptable, and of good quality for everyone on an equitable basis, where and when needed.
Where access to safe and legal abortion services are unreasonably restricted, a number of human rights may be at risk. According to the Human Rights Watch, these include the right to life, to health and healthcare, to information, to non-discrimination and equality, to be free from cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment, to privacy, to decide the number and spacing of children, to security of person, to liberty, to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress, to freedom of conscience and religion.
Sexual and reproductive rights are human rights, but unfortunately, it's pretty clear that if we want to see change, we're going to have to demand it. If you live in Queensland or New South Wales, why not contact your MP and let them know that bodily autonomy is a human right and that you want to see them take action on your behalf to decriminalise abortion here in Australia? Why not engage in discussions with family and friends and help them to understand that the decisions about your body are yours alone to make? Why not reach out to people in your community and let them know where to access important information and resources so that they can make informed decisions about their body? If we want to see change, we are going to have to be the ones to break the silence.
I really hope by the time our next episode comes out in 2 weeks, abortion will be decriminalised here in Queensland. Thank you so much for tuning in to our second episode of Activist Connect. We hope you tune in next fortnight.
Thanks, guys.